The first question that I have has to do with the relationship between the kind of civic, bureaucratic political processes you're describing and a rougher style of street politics that was also going on at the time. So, in several Ukrainian cities, the mayors were subjected to public lustration, or police stations were ransacked. And so, when we have a kind of threat of violence, or again, a sort of rougher street politics, does that impact how these local officials are reacting, or not?
I would say that in terms of violence and street politics and then garbage bin illustration, um, it was otherwise. The relationship was reverse. If the local government was not supporting Maidan from the beginning, then they got the illustration. In terms of local mobilization in Donbass, I do have the resolutions of anti-Maidans. I have not much of them, 31, but there were not much of them. But I do not plan to include them in my research because it's completely different universe. They contain completely different set of claims, mostly social, economical, and their political claims are quite the same in each of them. They just don't recognize the new Kiev government. That's full stop. In terms of text and context, I do plan to proceed with in-depth interviews in specific localities, and I'm still thinking about how to choose these localities. I will probably go for extreme cases, something outstanding, out of pattern, local government fully unsupportive, or local government fully supportive, something like that. And I hope to talk to, on the ground, to Maidan activists, to members of the local government then, and probably the NGO activists, and ask for their experience and their opinion, what has changed and how was it developing, and what was the mood back then. So this is what I plan to do.
Okay. I'm interested in the mobilizing role that local governments play, because it seems like there's a lot of attention on civil society, but my experience was that they played a role in sort of bringing people to cave and doing things that we might expect civil society groups to do. To what extent do you have evidence for that or not?
Yes, they've been very, very active in changing these political opportunity structures for maneuvering at the local level. Some of them were saying, go to Maidan, go to Kiev for New Year and Christmas Eve, and spend it there because this is where your nation is. And some of them were saying, come back to your families, come back from Kiev, come back to your normal life, think about your kids. They've been asking law enforcers either to protect the right to protest, or they've been asking the law enforcers to keep up public order, which, if you think about this, are completely different issues. Because if these were considered riots or some crazy things, then public order is important, and you've got 8 o'clock in the evening and everybody should be home. Or, they've been quite engaged in changing these circumstances at the local level.
In your presentation, but even more so in your paper, you talked about the power relations between teachers and students. And you suggested that so far there is no evidence that much has changed. I was wondering if you are also going to look at the power relations between teachers and parents, let's say, because parents are the actors that impact these relationships as well. And my experience is that Maidan has changed the attitudes of parents towards the learning process. They have used the rhetoric of Maidan to fight corruption in school, and perhaps that is going to have an indirect impact on the relations between teachers and students. So I was wondering if parents could be another, actor that you could integrate in your analysis.
Parents, absolutely, the agents of change who could also get involved, and they are involved. They were first to write about the critique about primary literacy books and ABCs, to involve more real life stories for their children in these primary literacy books.
Did you ask about how did really pedagogical staff act directly in the time of Maidan? How do they, for example, behave themselves with the students, their attitude towards the students that participated in some protest rallies, or did they oppress them or did they support them?
During the protests, teachers were with the students, sometimes going to the regional protests as well, but they were saying, we were explaining to students, kind of like trying to negotiate, let's do 2 lessons in school, and in the afternoon we will go together, because this will be over one day, and next day you face the test, the standardized test that you need to pass. So there was always this presence of standardized test, either it's Maidan time or war time. So it's really strong.
I think a comment more than a question, but it's about the pedagogy, social change that you're trying to instigate. So, speaking on behalf of public school teachers, oftentimes it's hard to bring them into the coalition when you're advocating for change from the outside, and the structure of the criticism takes the form of the students know better than you do. And over the long term, if you want to actually use your project in the way that you say that you do, it will be necessary to bring at least some of the Ukrainian education class into the conversation in one way or another. And I was wondering if there's a way to do that so that it doesn't come across as people in the West are using dialogic pedagogy and people in the East are using an old Soviet system that's out of date. Because it strikes me that if, that's somewhat implicit in the conversation. But if you approach it that way tactically, it's likely to backfire.
One of the hats that I wear, in addition to sort of academia, is an advisor to Minister of Education, Kvit. But I deal more with higher education than with schooling education. But one of the things that we've come up with, and this is directly come up against, rather, and this directly goes to the concept of the Maidan Effect, is that at this point in Kyiv, there is a lot of reformers in power and a lot of reform type initiatives, which are really quite radical. But in the regions, we're actually seeing quite a bit of resistance. So, I mean, one of the I think the underlying themes of what was said today was that, for example, the local Maidans would have been agents of change. You would expect teachers and school directors and parents and students to also be desirous of change. But in reality, I think that what you might be seeing is a demand for, change it because the old is bad, without necessarily having a positive program of how to change it, which I think actually goes into one of the things that Olya was talking about the local Maidans also. We want change because the old is bad, but not necessarily providing a positive program. So I guess my question to Elena is, there's a demand for change at the local level, but is this change to be brought about in a top-down kind of way, or are you finding any kind of local initiatives that would be supportive of a positive program for change?
These are all very connected, and I just want to bring a quote by one of the interviewees saying, if something needs to be changed, it should be a radical change. We cannot offer anything, we as teachers. In the past year, the government didn't offer anything to us. Do you suggest that we leave students now and start thinking about the project? What are these in-service institutes for, where a large number of people are employed? They tell me I have to have 10 variants of the test, and I work until 3 a.m. in the morning. I do not feel any help from them. Do we need all this bureaucracy? I do not understand. Perhaps we need to channel all this money into schools. So I'm not saying that this is the solution, but it's something that needs to be discussed and addressed. And also through my work as in the last months, we are trying to promote the idea of Ukrainian Education Research Association. And what I'm finding out with my colleagues in Ukraine, it just sometimes is about connecting the dots. For example, the initiative was 5 years ago as well, but what they didn't try and connect the alumni of and scholars who were educated abroad, and trying to get them on their side, trying to help and write grants together. I'm again talking about more higher education sector here, but there's something that someone needs to have a courage to get an overview and offer sometimes an alternative. And this alternative, coming back to the question that education reforms were developing in a wave format, like in the 1920s, there's a lot of that we can learn from there.